Hi there, welcome back to A Civil Discourse. Tonight we have a few interesting guests here. We have Antoinette Burris, who attended Spelman College. She was a graduate in political science. We have Deirdre Harris-George here, a current grad student at Lynchburg College studying nonprofit leadership. And we have Michael Jenkins, who's a regular on the show. I am Paul Papadopoulos, and I'm going to be your host. The first question I have for our guests tonight, and it's a pretty deep question. Why do you feel that reparations are due from slavery? Antoinette, would you like to kind of pick this up?
Yes, definitely. I think reparations are due from slavery because Black African Americans were enslaved and oppressed for 400 years from through racism, other forms of classism, economicism. We built this country. We built it on our backs. The division that was caused from slavery is prevalent now in our race between light skin and dark skin, because the light skin people were made to live in the masses' home, while the darker skin pick cotton in the field. And if we could give reparations to Black people to build again, and to really have a firm foundation, to build our schools again, to build our museums again, to build our community over again. And I think that we're owed that. I think we're owed just from justice, just through the power of being a good Christian nation. That's what we are owed.
I have a question for you, and this is a very serious question. Mm-hmm. In the United States in 2019, can we define who is Black? Black is a color to me, but it's also a very powerful word. Mm-hmm. So can you define who is Black at this point?
For reparations cause, Black would be the African Americans who built this country, who came over on the slave ships. Black would be the people
The descendants.
Yes. It would be the...
But when I say who's Black, I meant there are folks that are walking around that have African slave ancestry that it's hard to identify that they do, right? For example, my daughter. Mm-hmm. Okay, she has African slave ancestry, but on the outside, she probably doesn't look African. Mm-hmm. So, for the purposes of the discussion, I think we need to define that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's hard to define children who are so mixed that you could never tell was Black. And that's your daughter. She is at least 80 or 90% white. And I wouldn't say there should be a guideline or a measurement saying, well, you have to be 50.
She's 27% African.
She's 27% African. Well, I mean, if her mother is Black, you can, or if the mother is Black or the father is Black, you might be able to go through that way. I mean, you might not be able to go through the blood. If the parent is Black, she might be considered. I mean, I wouldn't know the exact measurement, but I wouldn't count out reparations because a child is highly mixed. I wouldn't think that would be fair to us either. And that goes back to the division that slavery has caused us, where we're even having the idea that this person is a little white, this one's too Black, and that's one of the problems that it's having in the Black community, where you can't even be safe among your own people because they won't believe you're Black.
So we're still back to that question, right? Mm-hmm. We can't. There's no real way to sort of define who is Black, who isn't Black, right? Or who is white, who isn't white, right? I wouldn't define myself as white. I consider myself Mediterranean.
Maybe you could go on the census. I mean, and when you mark yourself as Black, and when you go get a job, and when you have a Black child. I mean, that's nothing that can keep you from making a decision, because we know who's Black. I think we're 25% of the population.
I think it's like
35.
Maybe no, like 14%.
14. Oh, well, then that's even easier, you know.
So if I may.
Yeah, please.
If I may, I was just thinking, both of you raised very interesting points, and I think in terms of ethnicity that I hear you speaking of, and determining reparations, who should get it and who should be excluded from it, it may be helpful to use DNA testing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And for those who, for me, reparations is more about getting into the reason that that African Americans are saying that reparations is something that is important and should be explored and not just talked about but legislated, because we tried to sort of do this once before with affirmative action at the end of the civil rights era, but and it has helped, but it has not helped to create equality across the board in terms of what a person's life really is. And so I think it's important for us to, I think the DNA testing would be helpful in terms of establishing ethnicity, and in addition to that, I think we really need to think about why we even needed it in the first place. And so we need to get into things like the Constitution of the Confederate States of America. We need to read these things. We need to actually read the Emancipation Proclamation, and then we need to read the Constitution of the United States and see how all these things have affected each other and fit in with each other, and what the history is, and then where we are now.
Can I ask you another question? Because you're going in a direction, and I'm sure you and Antoinette both have, maybe you have varying ideas on this.
But I totally agree with you.
In what form, though?
Well, you have to think about what is reparations. To me, I think right now we might, maybe not, but I feel like we might be not all on the same page when it comes to defining reparations.
Oh, we're definitely not.
We're not on the same page. So to me, reparations is a couple things. It means to repair what was lost, broken, or stolen. And specifically, it is for one set of people in America. It's not for all black and brown people in America. It really is only for those, my understanding, it is only meant for those people who have, who are descendants of slaves in America, of the enslaved people that were in America, to help build America. So yes, there's a financial piece, but when you repair something that was lost, broken, or stolen, you have to look at so many other things that fit into what it means to live well. And I'm not saying live, financially very, very wealthy, but to live well, to live whole, to live happy, to live healthy. What does that actually look like? And what are all the things that go into creating a life like that could be meaningful?
Yeah, and I agree with you, but I don't understand why it's such a dilemma. If the Jews receive reparations,
yes.
If the Indians receive reparations, if they have their own
And
casinos, but they had some reparations. If they have their own casinos, I mean, I'm not saying we should have casinos, but can we have something? Can we have a casino? Can we have a mall? We love to shop. I mean, can we have? I mean, why is it so difficult?
Where's the mall going to be?
Right.
Well, I want to take you guys on another path real quickly. You talk about DNA. Do we need historical data? Let's say that, and I'm talking about numbers here because I kind of like to look at the data and the numbers, and we go back certain generations, right? And we say, okay, now your grandparents, that's 4. Your great grandparents, that's 8. So it's most likely great great grandparents, that's 16, or one step beyond that, about 32 folks, right? About 5 generations back. Out of those 32, does it matter if we have historical data to prove it, provability, right? Because obviously we need provability, but would the numbers be different for people that can prove a higher value of, when I say value, of slave ancestry?
I mean, it's not hard to prove. My great grandfather, his mother was a slave. His mother raised.
Your great grandfather.
Yeah, my great grandfather. His mother was a slave, and he was a slave right towards the end of slavery. It's not hard to prove. It's still in our culture, and that's why we have the slave mentality. That's why we have the slave culture, because it's that close to us. It's not hard to prove you're black. It's not hard to prove that you were from slaves, because it's still in our family. My great grandfather, his daughter was raised by a slave because that was her grandmother. It's not that far. 100 years. I mean, people know, 100, 150 years, people know who their slave ancestors
No, I
were.
get it that you know. And look, I'm not
Well,
disputing
we have the
any of
slave owners.
this.
We have the slave owners' records.
Right, I'm not disputing any of that.
Mhm.
What I'm just asking for is, when you go back to those slave records, right, if you can prove, does it matter if the person, the percentage of slave ancestry, does it matter at all?
I don't think
In
so.
other words, if Brad Pitt came forward and said, I'm 1/4 African and I can prove I have a slave ancestor, would he, in your opinion, deserve reparations? I'm not making a joke light of this at all.
No, I
I'm
wouldn't.
being
But
serious.
That's a good question.
first of all, I don't think Brad Pitt would do something. I don't think white people would do that. I don't think they would
Oh, I
want
think some of them would.
reparations.
Have you ever watched Who
I
Do You
think
Think You
someone-
Are? There are people that go on the show and find out that their grandmother was mulatto, okay?
That-
It happens all
that's
the
a good
time
point.
now.
See, that's
Through
interesting,
DNA
and that's interesting because see, part of the issue here is in my mind I'm thinking you say, okay, well, white people won't do that. I hate to say this, unfortunately, there's going to be people that will do it because
Absolutely.
we're talking about money and it's
Absolutely.
something they want. Yeah, it's something maybe they don't deserve it. But at the same time, how then do you guarantee that those who are going to receive it are deserving of it?
Well, if I could, the Native American population, through the Department of the Interior and the Bureau for Indian Affairs office, has a criteria, because I believe that they were faced with a similar dilemma when they were seeking to deliver their form of reparations for the native lands that were confiscated, taken. And so, exactly.
Now, when was that?
I don't know an
Okay.
exact
I don't remember.
date, but I know it's in the 1800s. But the point is, and maybe the office developed a little bit later, a lot of things came out of Woodrow Wilson's administration. You have to start looking at the administrations, and then later through other people for certain very specific reasons, and to push agendas forward. But so you said the question was, how would you ensure that reparations goes to who it's for? Well, I believe that you would do something similar. You'd have to create a system. So you'd have to have a department, like everything else, that deals just with that. We have a labor department that deals with making sure that, children don't have to go to work. They go to school instead of going to work, and they set certain standards and criteria and things like that for our work day and our work week and all that stuff. So it needs to be regulated. It would have to be something that, again, a lot of people from different backgrounds would have to come together on, scholars, whatnot. And then your leadership team. The intent of the leadership team, I think, has to be very well defined. The intent must be well defined, because this is something that we're hoping, you're trying to do something helpful for a group of people who have pretty much been forgotten or just oppressed continuously.
I want to interrupt and ask you a question because we're going down this path. Would the genealogical research?
Be helpful?
No, it has to be there. So who
I think it
is
does. I think it's
responsible
very
for
essential.
it?
NIH could do it.
But
Why not?
no. Okay. I'm going down this path here because if you're going to do the genealogical research, so let's say the government pays for that. They're have a
And the
create a new industry.
government's not going to pay for it. Taxpayers will pay for it,
All right,
ultimately.
well, the government is the taxpayers, right? We are the government.
They manage
So
our money.
if we do that, the question that keeps coming into my mind is, let's say you have a poor person in Atlanta, right? They've never escaped the cycle of slavery, let's say, today. We're not even Atlanta, outside of Atlanta, in the suburbs of Georgia or Alabama, somewhere like this. Who is going to do the research for them? Who's going to do it?
Well, we have a census. That why can't I understand why can't we have some form of a census? You have that by law. You have to fill out that honestly. So I mean that could be the simple.
Okay, wait, but you're saying go back in the census records?
No, but you know what? I'm listening to both of you.
I'm trying to figure this out.
The census could definitely be helpful, but you know what I'm thinking? And you say somebody, wherever, it would have to be federally appropriated, and then it would have to be regulated on the federal level because it has to reach every single state. Every single state. So I have a question though, if it's okay.
No.
I have a question for actually Mike and Paul. What would you stand to gain from reparations?
Well, I don't think it's so much trying to gain anything reparations. I think it's
Well, why is it
trying
important to you?
to me, to
What does it mean
finally
anything?
put what injustice was done in the past to rest and let everybody be the same, because we have so many opportunities here in this country.
What do you mean, but everybody has opportunities?
Everybody has opportunities. It's just that some of us are fortunate than others. Doesn't matter what skin color you are. You could be purple, you could be green. You grow up in a lower income neighborhood. You know, I grew up in lower, almost mid-level. Life wasn't easy for me. My parents worked really hard for everything they had. So I think we're very fortunate here in this country that we have opportunities that we don't in others. So for me, what does it mean? To me, it means let's come to a healing. Let's stop labeling people by the color of their skin, putting them into categories. Let's say, okay, what happened? Let's recognize that it was wrong. It shouldn't have happened, and it should be a lesson for life, and it should never happen again. And if there is slavery that's going on now in the world, which we know there is, what can we do from our life lessons here in this country for over 400 years to stop it?
Well, we did something in the 1980s and 90s. We got involved in the drive to end apartheid in South America because they used in South Africa they used the civil rights era and the things that came out of that as an example of how to. So we've already done that. We've already done all of that. What I want to ask you is beyond the healing.
Right.
How does reparations affect you? Beyond the process of healing, after we're healed, how does it affect you? Because we're talking about making things more equal.
Right.
Politically, and the biggest thing is economically.
Well,
So-
economically, I think things will never be equal between, and to me again, economic and has nothing to do with the person's color of their skin. Economic has to do with opportunity.
Okay, but if you have a group of people, that have never had the same opportunity because of systemic racism, do you know what I'm talking about when I say systemic?
Yes,
When
I
stuff
do.
is so far ingrained in your process of how you do everything, of how you conduct every single business, from banking to housing to, who gets a grant to go to a private school versus who doesn't. Every single thing that affects your daily life. So if you know that you're not a part of a group that has historically not been able to participate fully in the economic experiment called America, how does reparations for people who are not like you, because there are people who came here who they just don't have the same opportunities. No, and the other.
Well, let's back up. Let's talk about this for a minute. Let's go back. You know, my history, my ancestors, they all came from Italy, Europe, and Germany. When they came here, they didn't have nothing. They managed to get a small piece of land. They created a small dairy farm. You know, they worked really hard for what they had. But when they came here, they had nothing except what was on their clothes and their back. So that's what I'm saying is.
But then how
economic opportunity comes at all levels. It's what opportunities that you have. Now, I've lived in other states where it's mainly white people. For example, West Virginia, very poor, extremely poor. Okay, well, their economic situation, they're suffering too.
The difference is, and I congratulate you for that, and that is a blessing that you got the American dream. The black people have lived the American nightmare. We can come over here, we came over here in slave ships. The difference is racism. The reason they say that black people can't be racist, they can be discriminatory, is because racism is an economic, it's a classist, it's a power control. And when you came over here, and I'm very proud, I have that proud lineage. You were coming over here to white people who rule this world.
Who
And you
already
were coming
set it
to
up
your
for
brothers
you.
and sisters. your brothers and sisters and your cousins, and they said, we're going to hook him up. We're going to get him this contract. We're going to get him in this underground business. We're going to get him connections.
Well,
Black people.
I don't know my family.
I mean, but even if they didn't have that, they were coming to their grandfather, to their fathers, to their mothers. We were coming to our oppressor.
Okay, so the question I have for you, you're absolutely right. The question I have for you is, let's say, not taking it in a literal sense, literal and not literal, that your ancestors, because you use that example,
Sure.
there are lots of people who came over here, your ancestors probably came over too with not very much.
Right.
And had to go through a lot of trial and tribulation, and it was difficult and it was hard. But my question to you is, how easily could your ancestors assimilate into a system that would already give opportunity to potentially your ancestors over my ancestors?
Sure, absolutely, and I see what
Do
you're
you
saying.
understand that
I
question
get
very
that
clearly?
point. No, that's there's a clear difference there.
So
I
there
understand
is
that
not
because
there is not a similarity between how people got here and the struggle they had to go through, because almost everybody had to go through some kind of struggle. But
Everybody
there
has to
is
struggle.
nothing that equals the struggle that Africans endured. You're coming to a continent where you don't even understand what the climate is like. Do you see what I'm saying? You don't know what the vegetation is. You know nothing. And so your survival rate is actually low in the first year
Well,
that
that's
you're going
for
to be in this.
everybody.
No,
But
it is
that's for
not.
everybody.
No. The reason I say no, it is not, is because you, wait a minute. And we're talking about reparations, because understanding the history is vitally important, I think, to your people. Europeans did understand what the vegetation was after they had already gotten here 100 years before they brought
Correct.
African slaves.
correct.
Okay, so they gave themselves time. A lot of them died. You know all that. All right.
But I think you're lumping all quote unquote white people together in a big box.
No, I said Europeans.
Europeans. I think you're lumping them in a big
Europeans
box because
who came
it's
here.
factual that you can do the research and find out that, for example, the Greeks, my ancestors, were looked upon as the lowest of the low. In 1930s, Syrians and Greek were looked upon as the lowest rung social strata. So they
Of
weren't
Europeans.
considered
Wait a minute,
white
of what?
when
Of
they
what?
came here.
Of
They
Europeans or
weren't,
just
they weren't
immigrants?
considered white when they came here. My grandfather's
Well,
naturalization papers say his
Because
race
he
was
was
Greek.
Sicilian.
Well,
right?
that's also, I also have a Sicilian
He
grandfather,
was-
yes.
Right, so they were
So
brown.
So the point is, when we get back to reparations, from what you're telling me, our whole discussion, there needs to probably be some kind of a study to figure out the viability of what you're talking about. Is it actually possible to go back in the census and figure out how many slave ancestors did you have? Does it matter if you had 30% of your ancestors were slaves, right? And someone else 100%. Does that play a factor? Maybe it doesn't, maybe it does. I don't know. That's my point is, do all these factors play into this? That's the hard part.
So are you
I think
black
the answer
enough?
is
Are you
yes.
black enough?
No,
Yeah,
not
I'm
black
saying-
enough. Do you have,
So
does it matter?
Would the field slave get more than the house slave? Is that where you're going?
No, what I'm saying is, does the percentage, let's say you had free ancestors in Louisiana that were African, not black. I don't even like the word black, because black to me is a color. Let's say you had free ancestors that were in Louisiana. You had other ancestors, maybe they were came in the 1900s. I'm just asking these questions. I'm not trying to. When I say viability, I mean provability, right? I'm not saying that you can or can't prove it. I'm saying I don't know.
Yeah, I
So
think-
I
I
think
don't
all
know.
of this information is viable and important, but I sometimes think that we're putting the cart a little bit before the horse, because I think we need to come to an agreement on whether or not this country is ready to really seriously deal with the subject of reparations and go beyond talking about it and begin to legislate about it and be committed to legislating, even if we're going to legislate a federal department of whatever we want to call it to do these
Department of
kinds
Viability.
or
let's
whatever. Or, what I'm saying is, I think we need to come to an agreement in this country and let the majority decide. Maybe, maybe not, but we need to come to an agreement that a Department of Reparations is needed.
Now, someone also put forth a notion that I think you would agree with. This is someone I talked to said that maybe we could all agree that if you pre-1900,
See, I don't
if
think
you
that-
can prove your, well, no, hold on. If you can prove your ancestors were African pre-1900,
No.
99% chance they
No.
were slaves.
No. I think this is
Would
where
that be enough? No, I'm saying provability.
No,
wise.
I don't think that you put parameters on it like that, because you cannot enter into a conversation like this with the potentiality of excluding anyone.
But
who
how
may
can you
have,
not-
wait a minute, let
how
me
can you
finish.
not put parameters?
Let me finish. You cannot put parameters that will exclude anyone who has been touched by the damages of slavery.
But if your parents
I
came
don't
here in
think
the
you can do that.
1920s from Africa, let's say, then you did not have slave ancestors.
Then we need to define what reparations is and who it is meant to serve, because my understanding is that reparations is supposed to help to repair what was lost, broken, or stolen by the Africans that were taken from Africa and other places in the world to work
Well, then, so some
and build this
people have to be
company.
excluded.
Build this company.
Some people have to be
America.
excluded, right? Well, in other words, 85% of the population has to be, by definition, first off excluded.
If
Right.
you are a descendant of slaves,
Right.
then I think you are entitled in any way that helped build this country. And because of all of that, you were oppressed from the day your people got here till now. I think that the descendants of those people should be able to participate in something that is meant to repair what was lost, broken, or stolen. That's what I believe. That's
Okay.
what I
And that's
firmly.
But still,
That's
the
what I would
logistical.
vote for.
But still, we're still
But
in
I
the
mean,
logistical, call it a quagmire of what I'm saying is, I said pre-1900, if you could prove you had African ancestry, maybe you would qualify for reparations. That's the only stipulation I
No,
said.
you know why? Because do
Why?
you know that there was illegal slavery happening in Virginia, in different states in the South in
Yeah,
1927?
but there was slavery in Africa up until
We're not
30
talking
years
about
ago, is my point.
but our country is America. We're not talking about Africa. We're talking about a United States of America. Based
All right, so
based
that's
on
an
these
exception.
two
Okay,
documents.
if you can prove your ancestors were born in
Constitution
1920 as slaves, yes,
and the
obviously.
Emancipation Proclamation.
Obviously, you would qualify. Time out. That's obvious. Your parents were brought here as slaves in 1920. That's obvious. That's an obvious. What I was saying is, if you had a general cutoff of 1900, it's somewhat of a given that they were slaves.
Well, I think we see.
Like census-wise.
I think we
It
will
says
see.
black on the census, 1890, probably slaves.
I think we will see. I think
That's all
honestly,
it
was. What we
the census would
It's
help.
been
Higher probability.
It is
or
when the
not.
cart before the horse. So census would definitely help. DNA testing would definitely help.
Yeah, but the DNA testing is a difficult one. Because
I
that
don't see
only
why.
proves African ancestry, it doesn't prove
You know what?
slave ancestry.
Right.
I'm gonna tell you why I don't see why. Don't children have to be vaccinated before they can go to public school?
What's that
or
have to
any
do with
school?
DNA?
There are federal guidelines with the health organization that says that you have to be vaccinated for certain things before you go to public school
Yeah,
or
and-
any school.
and for
So
me-
why wouldn't we just legislate something like
the
this?
Native Americans do that for their reparations because a lot of black people in my community are mixed with Indians because my family ran from slavery on my father's side and on my mother's side, and the Seminole Indians protected them, and the Cherokee on my father's side.
Okay.
So I was always proud of my Native American
But they were
ancestry.
taken off the
so I thought being a regular, normal person, so maybe I can get reparations for the Native
But they were
Americans.
taken off the scrolls.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
weren't allowing
Right, but
people
I was-
of
but
African
they-
ancestry even to be Native American.
Right, but they're using DNA testing now. So I went to get DNA testing to see if I can get reparations, just like black people could. I don't even have 1% Native American.
But
I
here's
have
the only-
no
This-
Native
this
American.
But here's the only
I've got to
difference.
ask this question because this drives me nuts, and there's a lot of Americans out there. I don't care what color skin color you are. Let's just take that out, okay? Why now, 150 years later? This is the question that's come up recently. Why now, 150 years later, do you feel like you're entitled to something that you were not directly affected?
Because we are directly affected. Every day a black person is murdered. And
White people are murdered.
No,
Pink people
let
are
me
murdered.
finish.
Orange people are murdered.
I'm not
every day.
finished. You have
Every
to,
single day.
Mike. You have to let me finish.
You can finish.
But you know.
This is
I
a
would-
conversation.
No, it's a
We have
conversation, but,
conversation.
but that's not what we're talking about.
Go
And
ahead.
I wasn't even finished my statement.
Go
So
ahead.
you should let me finish.
I
So
am.
what I am saying is, you raised a question and I said no immediately, because anytime a black person is murdered because they are black and they're being illegally harassed, it is illegal to domestically harass someone just because you feel afraid for something that's in your head, and it's something that a person has done nothing to you. You're minding your business. You're living your life.
So now we're
Excuse
bringing
me.
in race.
We're bringing in all of that is a part of systemic racism,
that-
and it's a part of reparations.
Can I say?
It's absolutely a part of
It's-
reparations.
It's a lot of reasons. One reason is because we're free now, and they couldn't have guided 50 years ago because we were still going through Jim Crow. We were
Yes.
still going through segregation. We
Okay.
were still going
Sure.
through, so they couldn't have done it. So now, as their descendants, we are taking the stand to say, let me get justice for what has happened to us, what is happening to us, and the Indians were wiped out. The Native Americans were wiped out.
Sure. Yes.
So I guess you can say, well, why should their descendants didn't go through it, but they got reparations
Okay.
because they're the only ones alive? No, because that's how it works. The Jews were wiped out, 6 million of them. So I guess they didn't have anyone to give it to, but their descendants. We're their descendants, and that's part of it because they would have wanted us to have it.
And
Wait,
also,
wait, time out.
One
Wait,
second,
back to the viability issue.
No, hold on.
Wait, hold on. Wait,
No,
one
no,
second.
hear what you have
I
to
want to
say.
comment. I like what you said. It's the first time I've heard it explained to me in a way that I can agree and I can understand.
the other thing, Mike,
Okay?
is that
Because
affirmative
before-
action did not
before
work.
that-
affirmative action
No,
did not
affirmative
work.
actions never worked. And
And
affirmative
so,
action should be
so
gotten
the
rid of.
second part of the answer to your question is affirmative action that was supposed to come out of the civil rights era, which was actually supposed to come out of the Reconstruction era that did not reconstruct anything at all for us. It didn't work. Those things did not work. And so absolutely, yes, everyone who is a descendant needs to benefit from something that is going to help them because they have been hurt economically. We have been hurt economically, in education, and we have also been very, very hurt that no one really wants to talk about emotionally and psychologically, to the point where you don't feel safe anywhere because no one should not feel safe. And it is not African Americans' responsibility to make other people feel safe.
Wait.
If we are just living our lives, but this is a part of it because these things are happening right now,
But-
every day in this country, and this conversation is going on. Please let me finish. And reparations, you guys, I don't know, maybe going to cut a lot out. Maybe just go ahead.
What?
And
We're not
I just
cutting anything
wanted
out.
to interject one thing that Antoinette had said, and I love DNA testing. I think it's awesome.
can you
But
pause that for a moment?
But hold on.
Please.
Before you pause, we got this topic, reparations. We're talking about viability, things of that nature. So there's a lot of factors. Let's say we've got DNA, we've got census, we've got scrolls, things of that nature to go through. So in order, and we haven't even talked about what the reparations would be. We didn't get to that. We didn't. What is it? A money figure? Is it land? Is it
Well,
this?
that's
Is it
another
that?
show.
Right. That's a whole nother problem. We can agree there are a lot of very, very hurt feelings. This is a raw topic, and I get it. It's emotional. It hurts. Okay.
Why don't we
I get
talk
it.
about how she's affected? She's part black,
But-
and she's never talked to, not really, about being black. Sometimes, yes. But in terms of, in my opinion, she's made to think that it's important to have a love for all of who you are, all of your ethnicity, and not to see yourself as black. But in America, that's not a reality.
What
Not
do you
yet.
think the reality is?
Not yet. It's just not a reality.
No, I'm talking about. You were talking about her. What do you? I didn't follow the train of logic yet.
Oh.
What was the final? What? I didn't get where you were going.
She's not talking. I said we're talking about reparations. How do you think something like that would affect a mixed chick like Alana, who's very, very mixed, but who doesn't look like she's mixed? Phenotypically, people receive her first for her whiteness, And
How
so,
would it affect her?
what do you think?
How would reparations affect? Well, actually, that's a good question, which brings us back to what slavery has caused. Because some blacks used to pass, and they would pass in slavery, and they would try to be treated better. They would try to be treated fair.
Some
and they would try to be
people-
free. Yeah.
Well, can I don't want to interrupt, and I am interrupting. Some people with African ancestry, because I believe it's empowering for you to say, you're not black, you have African ancestry. Be proud of that. I think that's been repressed in people. You've been told you're black, but you actually have African ancestry. You know, you could do a DNA test and say, you know, I'm not black. I have Ghanaian ancestry. I've got ancestry from Cameroon. It's empowering to know what you are. Every human being should know what you are.
Well, black people would call first.
And
they
maybe
called
that was
colored.
stolen from you, right?
Well, black people would call first it was colored,
Right.
and we like that. Then it became black during the Black militant, during the Black Panthers, because that was a way of identifying what you were and for pride.
Right.
And then it became African American.
Right.
So we've changed and evolved.
I got it.
So
maybe some of the pain comes from not knowing that countries of origin, right? So there's pain in people when they don't know. Like my mom was adopted. She always felt pain because of, I don't know who I am. So maybe there's pain in every African American who does not know country of origin. You can say, when you look in the mirror, I don't know what I am. I don't know.
But I know the country of all of my origins, and I still feel pain every single day that someone in America of African descent is terrorized. It's very real to me, and it depresses me. I get depressed and I get afraid because the Constitution protects our freedom of movement first and foremost. And we don't have freedom of movement anymore. And a lot of people can say, well, neither do I. But it's not the same. I'm sorry, it's just not the same. And when we talk about, well, I can't go to certain places either and feel safe, a lot of times European Americans are referring to pockets of places called the ghetto. But that's not everywhere. That's not everywhere.
Okay.
African Americans, especially now, as an African American, I'm going to speak for myself. And some people may not see me as African American, whatever, or think somehow life is easier for me, but I promise you it is not. It is so not. And I am afraid to go certain places because of the things that are happening and resurging now that our parents already were supposed to be dealt with.
Sum it up, there's a lot of raw feelings. We opened up what I would call a Pandora's box today. And these discussions are difficult, they're painful, but actually I think cathartic maybe in a way that you can express how you feel. I don't know if we actually got anywhere. We got some viewpoints out that were great from both of you.
I got a
And
lot
so
out of
here we
today.
are.
I learned a lot that I hadn't sat back and looked at from a different perspective. So I learned a lot. Do I completely agree? No, I don't.
Well, what do you disagree
But
with?
I do sympathize. I do see the pain. I see the hurt. I definitely see where, when you made the valid point about the Indians and how they had reparations, and the same with the Jewish people, that hit home with me because now I see what you're saying and why you believe. Now the biggest question comes in my mind is how do we determine who is deserving of it? That's in my mind.
Sounds like we'd have to have a
Thank
council
you.
on that.
What do I think?
Yeah, what do you think?
Well, I think part of it was almost, I like what Paul said is from, what was, Paul, you mentioned something about 99 years.
No. What it was, I didn't come up with that. Someone said to me that if you looked at people who had African ancestry pre-1900, you're pretty much guaranteed their ancestors were slaves.
So
You can find on the
So I would
census
say-
that your ancestors were here pre-1900. So those might be, not excluding people.
Right.
I'm
That's
not
the
trying to exclude
starting
that.
point.
Right, the starting
That's
point
a
would be
good
there.
starting
Your
point.
baseline
To say,
of
we know
pre-1900.
these people,
probably
it's at least a
slaves.
99% chance that they are.
Yes.
Maybe we just automatically go ahead and give it to them.
Right,
Now,
but
that
we give them what though?
smaller
We haven't even
percent-
gotten to give what?
Right. We don't even know what we're giving exactly, and then maybe that smaller percentage there. Those are going to be the ones that struggle then to have to prove. You know, and yet, is it a struggle? Unfortunately, in all government programs, there's always proof. I'm not going to mention the program. I worked on one where people had to go through all different kinds of medical testing and stuff like that to prove, and this is the common word, more than likely or not.
You know the interesting thing when you talk about.
So what is it? More than likely or not, and how do
Wait,
how
Mike.
do we get it?
Mike, here's an interesting guy. I love.
So
who
I
you
just wanted
think
to
you are.
mention
Go
when
ahead.
you. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
When you
No, no.
mentioned
All
when you
right.
mentioned that pre-1900,
Yeah.
are you all aware that there were pre-1900 there were a lot of census were either not taken or burned.
Yeah.
So then how does that?
Then you probably
how
have
would
to
that
go
help?
back
Because-
onto
It's a starting
How
point.
would that
You have to go back.
church
I'm sorry.
documents or
How would that
county
help those
courthouses.
people that are affected by the fact that documents were either not taken or they were destroyed or lost?
Well,
Then
see,
how?
but I
How do
didn't
we cover
mean.
those folks?
I didn't mean demeaning
Unfortunately, I
about
think
people
we've
who had.
always-
I didn't mean to be demeaning when I was talking earlier about people who had African ancestry, but watching Who Do You Think You Are? You know, you find out that, for example, Steven Tyler from Aerosmith had an African ancestor during the Civil War, which, like, we would have known, right? But, like, he's on that line of, yeah, he's got that, but I don't really consider Steven Tyler black. I mean, and that's just me. You know, or the guy from Modern Family who had, like, 2% African ancestry. Like, that stuff's kind of weird. Like, they didn't know. You know what I mean? Like, that's...
Okay, you know, I would say that the purpose of this conversation was mainly to discuss whether or not there is a need for reparation.
Absolutely.
I mean, what I heard here, in my opinion, absolutely, I do believe there is that need.
Right.
And we cover beyond that. This is not a one episode conversation by any means. I believe that we have to continue this in another point, but like, again, I think we answer that question. Is there a need for reparation? I think yes.